Recording started.
Hello, everybody. I want to welcome you to this week's Matrexit discussion group call here at Tactical Sovereignty. And we are here this evening with a basically long time Facebook friend that was part of our original group, Tactical Sovereignty Administrating the Estate. That group is still open. It's been open back up again now for about a month. I've just left it open. But we have a new group now. It's Tactical Sovereignty Administrating the First Estate. And if people are aware of what the first estate is, well, look into it if you don't know. But like I always say, this is this week's podcast, this beautiful Sunday, the first day of the week. Therefore, not the seventh and not the Sabbath. But that's just an example of one of many things we've all been deceived about. And tonight we have a guest with us, Kary Adams. We're going to be doing an upcoming episode with Micah Dank on his channel. And I think tentatively it's supposed to be this week, but we decide, we want to get together anyway and talk again before we do that recording with him and just kind of find out where we're all at, what page we're on, in this journey. And it'll help make that video go smoother with Micah Dank on his channel as well. So I'm going to turn over for a minute to Kary and let her introduce herself and let us know where she comes from and what she's all about. How you doing tonight, Kary?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me on, Brian. I really appreciate it. And I just want to start out saying, expressing my extreme gratitude for all that you've done for the community, for people. I really look up to you, and I'm not trying to just get on your show and kind of blow smoke, as it were. I really genuinely, this is really coming from the bottom of my heart because when I first kind of got into this journey, as you know, a lot of the groups were really underground. It was very hard to find. And you were really the only person that kind of trailblazed and kind of was brave enough to get on Facebook. Right. That's just an area that we all know is heavily monitored, and you did it, and you created a space for us all to go share information. And, I told you this before, I can't imagine all of the flack that you got and the, things that you've gone through to help us out. So I just wanted to start out expressing that I'm very humbled to be here. And I kind of fell into all this. Brian and I were just talking about this for a couple minutes before on the show. So I thought that would be a good place to start, Brian, kind of how adversity leads us into where we end, or, where we are now. Yeah, so I basically we were talking about how kind of bad things happen to us and lead us into that the place that we are now, how we find this community, how we become involved in this movement, if you will. I guess that's kind of what I look at it as now. When I joined Brian's group, like I said, there's probably about 1,000 people in his group or so, and it just kept growing and growing and growing. And it was really exciting to see that so many people were seeing what everyone else was seeing and coming together and start studying these things and opening our eyes, right? But one thing that really kept me coming back to your group was the fact that you saw the spiritual layer, and not a lot of people had seen that layer. So for me, I had my adversity, which was I was diagnosed with cancer and came through with that. And that was many, many, many years ago now. But that led me to kind of, really becoming a more spiritual person. And when I was doing that with so much, conviction of just seeking answers and saying, okay, I know that, we're strong and powerful, and, God, show me the way. And when, ask and you shall receive kind of thing, I literally just kept asking for the, the knowledge and the wisdom. And it just opened. It opened right up, and I started seeing all this information just coming to me in huge waves that I couldn't write fast enough. I couldn't look up fast enough. I was up all night sometimes looking at things. And fast forward, I started, learning this stuff and going, wow, this is really fascinating what they've done. And I didn't really at first. I would definitely wouldn't say I just fell into kind of the spiritual layer of it right away. It was more along the lines of probably like when I started reading about the lawyers verses and the merchantry verses and started seeing how commerce tied in. And as I was reading all of those things, kind of I think it's in Luke, woe to you lawyers, you've taken away the knowledge, right? The key of knowledge. You don't come in yourself, but you're hindering people entering knowledge. I'm paraphrasing. I can't remember the exact verse, but I started seeing things like that. It really opened my eyes, and then you start digging because you really want to know more. You're like, whoa, am I really seeing what I'm seeing here? And in a sense, that actually led me into kind of a confusing time in a way, because I started questioning everything. And I'm like, what am I reading here? Like, what is this book that I've, been indoctrinated through the church to read it a certain way and interpret it a certain way? But I was kind of being shown a whole different side of it now. And it was, I don't know about you, Brian. Have you ever had that moment where you just sat back and went, what am I reading here?
Yeah, I had that a few times actually, and it was interesting for me because, for instance, I had never gone to a public school. I had gone to a quote unquote Christian school all my life, and so I was heavily indoctrinated with churchianity, put it that way, and there was a lot of things even within the school and within the church, things that really didn't really make sense to me. And I would question my teachers about it, question the pastor about it, and never really get the full response you're looking for. I think most commonly people are just told, well, you got to have faith. You know what I mean?
Believe. Yeah. Everything's just believe and believe what we're told. And I think it kind of comes to a point where you go, wow, well, no wonder no one asks questions. No one raises their hand. It's not, it's, you're told this, but there's no Q&A at the end. Right. So you don't get to ask questions, and you're taught one specific thing. And it just really kind of made me go, well, you know what would happen if I actually reorganized the New Testament into chronological order? How would it read then? So then I started just kind of really diving in. And again, this is like kind of through my whole, cancer journey. And then I started just becoming really thankful that I had made it through. So I wanted to give back. And it was just a really like spiritual time in my life, because I felt very alone. I kind of went through cancer alone, because I was up in Michigan at the time. My family was spread between Ohio and Florida. So I was really by myself. I ended up moving back to Florida to kind of be closer to my mom and just, have that sense of family and everybody being there. But at the same time, it was kind of a good thing that I self-isolated, because I had time to do all this. For the first time in my life, I wasn't, consumed with going out with friends or birthdays and dinners. And, I was by myself. But that was part of the adversity that actually made me stronger, that actually made me go, wow, there's so much more here. And I really did not know anybody else that saw this, thought this way, anything. And fast forward, well, actually at that point, I started giving back, working in, different avenues through churches, just going to, restore neighborhoods in Pontiac, Michigan. And then when I moved back to Florida, got involved in a food pantry down here where you had a lot of young girls came through. And so I decided that I wanted to get involved with that. And, they said, oh, well, you need to be ordained to be on the board, and we need ministers and this and that. So I was like, okay, well, we'll do that then. I wanted to be committed and do that. But I think anybody going through this, you're you start to learn that whole spiritual side and the ministry side, and it becomes a whole different thing than what we're taught, right? You start to realize that your spiritual walk kind of is your ministry in a different way. And my eyes were kind of open, like, wow, this is now my journey. This is my path. It's, you know, a twist that I didn't see coming. And then after, a few years, fast forward a couple years, I ended up getting a love letter, I call them, because I try to I try to turn everything into positive, right? All the adversity, it really was, because then I had to actually put into practice what I was seeing, in your group and other groups. I came from I told you, kind of the old school, group of guys that were out there teaching this. Everybody from, I think the first one I actually found, it was either Boris Erickson or Dean Clifford. I don't know if you remember his stuff. But that was the first ones that I kind of found. And some of the teachers, even you at the time that I was in it, were over my head. I'm going to be straight up honest with you guys. I really was like completely lost at first. I knew that the information was accurate. It resonated with me so deeply, but I was just like, I got to keep hearing it over and over. I got to understand it. And sometimes I would read things and I wouldn't understand it. So I would just start going back and looking at that word, looking up that code, looking up the words that were in that code, then breaking down the etymology of those words. And, it became this kind of fun path that I was on that, you're kind of on it by yourself, at first. And when you start telling your family and friends, they think you're crazy. And so, but they didn't think I was crazy for too long, because after I started getting those IRS love letters, and it was for a business that I had started not too long before, and they just came out and said I owed all this astronomical amount of money that I didn't have to pay. So I was trying to, settle the matter, resolve the problem. Okay, who do I talk to? How do I get this, problem to go away? I don't owe this money. I knew that I didn't owe the money. It was a mistake. I started diving in, kind of looking at how I contracted with the IRS, because, once you start opening that IRS code, wow, that IRC there's a lot in there that just made me go, whoa. Just really blew my mind. And I don't want to kind of repeat too much of what I've talked about on, on Micah's show or anything like that, but I'll kind of go through that quickly. So I figured out that I had contracted with them through a W-9. Now, I had never really been a quote unquote employee before. I was always an independent contractor. I was always very entrepreneurial minded. I had a small business. I contracted with different companies out there to do what I did. But there was one company specifically that requested that I use a W-9 with them. And I didn't connect all this at the time, of course, until, I'm going back and try to figure out, where did I misstep? What happened? And my conclusion was that I had contracted with them through the W-9 that obligated my legal person to pay all of this money. It was well over six figures. And so I was just, freaking out. Like, what do I do? Where do I go? And so I found Adele Weiss on Talkshoe and started reading and absorbing everything he was saying. He was explaining it to where I could understand what had happened. And then I just kept diving deeper and deeper and deeper into it, to where I understood exactly what had happened and how they had, made us federal employees. And it just clicked. Oh, yeah. I, heard that the United States is a corporation, right? So, and again, this is 5-6 years ago now. So I'm trying to piece all these things that I had been learning on the side, and it was like, this is where the spiritual aspect came in for me. And I have to kind of pause for a second and say that on a spiritually healing side, and I don't like to influence anybody about, where their beliefs are. We're all going through this. We all are kind of questioning and finding our path. And I think that's a really beautiful thing, because we have to find that inner truth for ourselves. Um, I did a fast. How I healed myself from cancer, I was luckily connected with this chiropractor up in Michigan who educated me and connected me with a woman who really helped coach my health back. And she said, you can't say this, but I'm gonna cure you. I'm gonna help you, cure this. And she's like, I'm not allowed to say that, but I'm gonna tell you that I can do it. You just have to trust me. You're gonna hate my guts. I'm gonna make it like boot camp. And one of the things that I had to do was fasting. And so I fasted for the first almost 2 weeks on water alone. And then I went to organic raw juices, high in a lot of orangey foods, beta carotene, vitamin C's, dandelion, a lot of stuff like that. And over the next 4 weeks, so a total of about 6 weeks on nothing but liquids, extra minerals, because one of the things that I learned was, in order to rebuild the cancer cell, you had to do that from the molecular level. And the only way to do that was through minerals. And what are we made of? The salt of the earth. So they're called cell salts for anybody who's not familiar, or slusher salts, some people call them. So I flooded myself with minerals, vitamins, etc., to get healthy again. During that period, when I was attempting to heal myself, during that fasting period, I'm just going to be point blank. Something happened during that time that was, I'll say, divine. I'll just say it. I started having a lot of visions, and of course, you don't have food, right? So you might see things. First you think it's hallucinations, but the spiritual aspect of it and the things that I was feeling, like the love that I had just never experienced, on this realm, in my heart, was overwhelming. Like I still I'm trying not to get, my throat is getting tight now talking about it, because it was so profound, so beautiful, the things I was dreaming about and seeing. And I truly feel like when we really search and we really truly ask, again, it's given to us. And that knowledge, a lot of what I was seeing started to open up at that point. So I just wanted to give that little backstory, because sometimes the greatest things can come out of adversity. And that was such a pivotal point in my life that it's like God took me away from all my friends and family, stuck me in cold Michigan. Sorry, Brian, I know that's your home area. And I love Michigan. I still have most amazing friends there to this day, probably any more than anywhere else I've ever lived. Michiganders are truly good people. They're great Midwesterners, and I really actually enjoyed my time there, even though at the time I was again dreading moving there. Right, so I was like, "Oh, you're going to stick me in Detroit?" Like, really, of all places, I did not want to go to Detroit. Cold, weather. But it actually ended up being a godsend, because I would have never met the chiropractor, who would have never introduced me to this woman, who did kick my butt, and she just educated me on things I was eating, which a lot of that was biblical, and how they were toxins, in my body, and what they were doing, and how, one of the things she stuck with me forever was pork. She said, the toxins will absolutely never, the toxins never leave their bodies. They'll eat cancers off other pigs, and then it will never leave their bodies because they don't sweat. So we're ingesting all that. And so it's, just a lot of things she said. To this day, I still don't eat pork after that. So I just really tried to keep my body clean. And I feel like when we do those things, and then of course you've got the story of Jesus fasting, and that's when a lot of the knowledge came. And I really believe there's something to that. I don't know if anybody else has had that kind of experience, but for me, that was probably the most profound part of my life, and I don't regret a minute of going through all that. Looking back, I see how it all led to this. So coming through all that kind of gave me renewed strength. Had the courage to, female by myself, go through this process that Adele Weiss helped walk me through. Can't say enough great things. This guy was just really, really helpful in a time that I really needed him. And, was afraid. I had never done anything like this in my life, never been in trouble, never went to jail, never, had anything to do with a court hearing in my life. Besides, going with someone else to be a support. So I really just was not familiar with the legal system at all. I didn't know how to open a court case. So, that all part of it was new to me. But the things that, you were talking about, Brian, and the things that Adele was telling me, and of course, a lot of the other teachers, just started to really click. And we went through this process of not only revoking the election, but also, going to the court. And we did everything by mail. And again, this was my real big moment of revelation, was Matthew 5:25. And I'm going to layer the spiritual side on it, because I just think that that's so important. And I know you talk about this, ad nauseum per se, but Matt 5:25, this verse just literally came to me. Reconcile quickly with your adversary while you're still on the way to court. So stop there while you are still on the way to court. So I was like, okay, we have to do this before the court. So how do I do that? And that's kind of what led me to, finding Adele. I have to do it before, and I need some guidance, because I did not know how to cook up a lawsuit. The rest of the verse is, otherwise he may hand you over to the judge, and the judge hand you over to the officer, and the officer will throw you into prison. So knowing about the exchequer and throwing into prison and all the stuff that I had learned from all of you guys and your wonderful groups and support, obviously I didn't want to do that, and wanted to, settle everything and take care of everything. And he helped me walk me through. And I just got to tell you, that was 4 months of probably the biggest stress of my life. I think I studied for many weeks before even making my first call to the IRS. But one thing that I did notice is when I started asking them about the things that were in the IRC, which is the code, they started hanging up on me. And so I knew that I was asking things that, okay, there's something to this, which kind of, I guess in a way, made me angry that I was getting hung up on, just out of common courtesy, human decency, right? So I'm like, you're supposed to be here to help us. But, of course, I'm working on the public side at the time. Hadn't done everything yet. I just started the, not too long before the authentication process, I think, when I found Brian's group, which I told him, I was like, oh my gosh, I wish I had found your group before, because, I'm fumbling through it on my own. But all that was learning stage to show me that I could do it, myself, and I could figure it out. And it's not as scary as I thought. So we went through this tax case through mail. Everything was done through registered mail directly to the judge. And about 4 months later, we had gone back and forth several times. And Adele told me, whatever you do, do not pay that court fine. And I said, Adele, at this point, how many cases have you walked through on this? I'm curious. I did pay him. I'm like, what am I paying? I just wanted to kind of some reassurance that, he had done this before. And he said, at the time, I think he said over 3,300 cases, which blew my mind. 3,300 cases, just process that. I said, well, how many came out, okay, successful, whatever you want to, deem it as. And he said the same number, 3,300 cases, whatever the number was. And I just my heart just was set at ease. And I knew at that moment that was the right question to ask, because I just completely knew that it was going to happen and everything was going to be okay. So then I just kind of deep breathe, ate well, just kind of laid okay, God, here it is. You've been putting all this information out there, and let me find it before I had the problem. So I knew who to go to help.
Oh, Kary, now you're going to be triggering people because you're using that 33 number.
Oh yeah, I didn't even realize. Okay, there was another number, 3,342, whatever he said. I can't remember, but
well, and to add also, tonight's episode happens to be number 322.
No.
So there's that 332 or 322 skull and bones number, right?
Yep, it sure is. It sure is. Well, maybe we've disrupted a chord, I guess. There, but yeah. So that's kind of the intro to where I got to kind of really embrace Brian's group, and I wanted to, just kind of show that I followed what he was doing with the status correction. I took your advice on things. I was literally poring over everything that you would upload, because I just, certain people you feel like a resonance with. Like, I feel like this is a person who knows, what they're talking about. Some people right away I knew, no, it's not resonating with me. I'm like, I don't know about that. So I think a lot of that was guidance too, but I loved how you layered the spiritual on it. And that was kind of the most important thing for me. And now I completely read the verses very differently. I pulled away from people for a while, right? Like all my Christian friends, because I'm like, I don't see it this way anymore, right? Like I see it totally different. This book is very different from what I was brought
Well,
up as.
it's a matter of not just reading the verse or reading it differently, but going back and read the whole chapter. Wrap your head
Yeah,
around what's going on. It's like people want to bring up the scripture where it says that God is no respecter of persons. Okay, well, don't just stick with that. Go read the whole chapter. See what's really happening. Okay, because it's talking about, whether the Jew or the Gentile is being honored over one or another. And that's all that really comes down to. That, God does not look upon the king any higher or lower than he looks upon the serf, which
right.
that makes total sense, right?
Yeah, and especially if and I don't know, have you seen Micah's video on what is God? Have you seen that one?
Yep, that was what, about a month ago, I think.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I thought that was so interesting that he took those scriptures and really challenged people to think, because I don't really, it's funny, I really never liked to share this story at first, because it was so personal to me. But one of the visions that I had when I was ill was, it was like I went up into space. Like it was just this just drawing, and I went up and I saw this light, and I kind of like was like kind of curious about it. But when I got closer, it was like, I don't know how to even, I can't really put into words, but like golden sparkles. That's about the best way that I could describe it. But it was golden, and it had like a, goldeny hue. And it was almost as if, and I can't really put this into words. You know how visions are. You try to write your dreams down, and it's really nothing like you saw, but at least you get it because you know what you saw. But the best way I can describe it is, I saw this, like, you know, I don't even know what it was. It wasn't like a, you know, a form per se. It was like energy. And it's as if it showed me that it took a part of itself and just like whipped it out, and it kind of shattered, if you will, is that, this might be the best word. I don't know what it was. It broke apart into, millions and millions and millions of little tiny lights. And it was just very clearly shown to me that that was us. And so at that moment, I totally understood like the omnipresence. And that was just a profound, maybe some people have already got there. I wasn't at the time. So it just really kind of set with me. Um, and I started looking at people differently. Like, that we're all part of that. And I'm like, wow, I literally could be looking at, another piece of that. And it just changed my whole mindset. It really completely changed my whole mindset. And that's kind of like a change that I went through where, I realized if I had enough knowledge and education to help people in certain aspects of what they were going through, then that was kind of part of my little mission on the side, taking a cue from people like yourself. And I know it can get overwhelming. And I tried to stay really small and just help all the little seniors in my community. That's kind of how it started. And I started kind of helping educate. And then some younger folks came in, and pretty soon we were having little mini meetups in my area where we would just kind of meet and talk in this park area. And now it's interesting where everybody's kind of like wanting us to do a, like a Saturday all day or a Sunday meetup where we just kind of do a little foundational thing and help them kind of get started in all this journey. And I think it's a really beautiful thing, the movement and the growth of it that I'm seeing in so many different groups, everything from Facebook groups, Telegram groups, people putting stuff out on YouTube. I mean, it's growing right now. It's like, it's absolutely fascinating what's happening. And, Brian, you kind of helped trailblaze all that in opening it up to Facebook.
Well, maybe you could help me with that actually, because I think that one of the common terms people use is the truth movement. And I think the truth movement has gotten so tainted that
Yeah.
it's anything but truth. So I'd really like to come up with a different name, to go by, because that's just too broad of a brush. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. And it was even a struggle for me because I started, kind of organizing it a little, what I was doing a little bit better. And I would just jump on the Telegram mic and answer questions about what I had been through. And, I didn't like to educate people on anything that I hadn't been through. Like if I hadn't done it and I hadn't been successful with it, I'm not talking about it. Like I'm not the right person, but maybe I can connect you with somebody,
Absolutely.
and just growing the network. And the one thing that I really would like to see in this network, because as you know, I mean, you probably know more than anyone being on Facebook, I really want to see the people really just being more respectful of each other and like not so attacking when because that was one of the things that I shied away from. Like as a female, I have that very, I'm an Aquarian, so I have this very empathetic, you know, uh, I guess just, that's who I am. I'm an empath. And so when I see the infighting within the groups, like that kind of pulls me away. So, I always tell everyone that like even comes into our little meetups, I'm like, hey, like we discuss everything here, like that's one thing that if I could have any wish in this, I actually never called it really a truth movement. I don't even, I don't really know what I called it. I just, knowing the difference between the legal person, the private, I usually, actually probably what I usually say the most is private side versus public side, education, and just opening people's eyes as to what that is, what that means for us. And using this knowledge to test out, I say test, meaning I don't have any kids, but I have like 20 nieces and nephews. um, very big family. So I like to try and see how this knowledge and wisdom translates down into the kids. How do we take this, comprehension and break this down? I'm sure the elite, they've known this since they were born, that they were in private side and trusts and this whole world. So part of my, I guess, mission, besides like I love helping seniors and just kind of people, just helping them understand what's going on in very simple language, um, because that's kind of how I learn. I have a deep mindset, but sometimes I don't grasp things right away. Like it takes me a couple times reading it, and then over and over and over again, I'm like, okay, I'm good, I got it now. But how do we do that? How do we bring this next generation through? So my mission has become helping people, like especially our seniors, helping them with some of these things they're going through. Like, nothing breaks my heart more than somebody that worked their entire life, is in their, retirement age, and is losing their home that, they paid for, and they can't pay their property taxes. So somebody's coming in and taking it. Like there's nothing that just, it just makes me want to cry. Like again, I'm a total empath, right? So I want to help those people and also figure out a way. And I've been kind of talking with some ladies who know this as well. Is how do we start educating the kids? What can we do to start creating? That's kind of my background is well, it's more adult education. You know, I worked in automotive and had to take very intricate information from engineers and figure out how to translate that down into salesmen and saleswomen. So there's a big, you know, gap there, and how does that translate to the customer, right? So I'm kind of taking that same concept of this whole very confusing realm for a lot of people, and how do we start from the beginning teaching our, you know, our offspring, what hat are they wearing when. So that's kind of become my new mission. So it's funny you said Truth Talk, but I actually called my little group Truth Talk just because we were a little PMA that we started on Telegram in a little chat, and I'd jump on the, you know, mic and just kind of help people answer questions. But that's kind of my mission, has become helping people that want to set up, you know, private trust and start trying to learn how to be on that private side, which, Brian, maybe there's, you know, talk for us of how we can combine that, where we can, you know, get your education in on there, because that's where I came from, and building this whole thing. Because I think one of the things that the information is so scattered, right? Everybody says that. I mean, I was searching everything from IRS codes to, you know, every code out there, Liber to UCC to, you know, everything. How do we bring this into, you know, if you're having kids, how do you start teaching them this, you know? And I think that's just kind of become my mission so far. So that's kind of where I'm at right now with it, in figuring out a way that we can really bring people together who have kind of expertise in certain, you know, areas, and saying, can we build our own education system? Like, if you build it, they will come, right? And I know you guys have been doing this forever, but, you know, I look at it all the way from the little ones, because I don't want them to go, my nieces and nephews, to go through what we've gone through. And I mean, what if they were able to completely come through knowing who they were?
I think a good start really for people, and everybody looks at things differently. Some people need more like visual type things, you know what I mean? For instance, and
Yes.
I think it really would probably be the easiest for most people if they did have some sort of biblical background knowledge, because this whole system, like you brought up Matthew 5, go quickly to your brother, which I've used that, I've put that in action myself, and it's worked. But these are the things that I think people need to be able to turn their eyes to and be able to see, like, for instance, you know, physical example, kind of a connecting the dots kind of situation. I mean, you brought up Matthew 5 with go quickly to your brother. And I've also used scripture that talked about the borrower being servant to the lender when it comes to how you set up your bank account. That's found in Proverbs 22. Clean hands doctrine, that comes from Psalm 24 and several other places. Romans, I'm sorry, not Romans, but there is some stuff in Romans, but Paul does put out some good info. He had to, but I think he also kind of sprinkled it with stuff that led people in the wrong direction. Somehow, in whatever those 10, 20, 30 seconds were, where he got blinded on the road to Damascus, somehow he was able to get a big enough download to write upwards of maybe 17 books of the New Testament. I mean, gosh, what an incredible download that must have been that he got there, right? I mean, good Lord. Even though the story is told differently, and 3 different times he tells it. But anyway, in Proverbs 22, it talks about the clean hands doctrine, like I mentioned. And also talks about, you know, don't be surety.
Yes.
And
Yes.
sorry, you want to back up, it'd be Psalm 24 regarding the clean hands doctrine. But there's few places in Scripture where it talks about not being surety. Scripture says you will surely smart for it.
Yes.
You know? And they also refer to the surety or the guarantor in Proverbs 11. And when we start looking at this system and seeing all these things, how they all tie into each other, it becomes very obvious that the system is running according to biblical principles. No matter what anybody wants to think about the Bible or whatever, you just have to put all that stuff out of your head and look at things with fresh eyes when you start researching. You can't bring along your previous, you know, presumptions or conceptions of what you were taught. Otherwise, you're not going to see the info for what it really is.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's really rule number one for people to start learning. And as far as visual, I want to kind of show you something this evening that goes to like visually how you can show things. I've posted several memes on social media, basically showing a courthouse side by side with a temple or a
Yes.
sanctuary. Yeah, and it's like all the elements are there. And in fact, the one photo I show, you can't tell the difference between the two because this really is an ecclesiastical system that's being run. And the only difference is that the system has gone and put its butt on the seat of the most holy and wants you to look at it as God, as the Herods did, the Caesars did, as the Pharaohs did. All of those people, all of those figureheads were the God of the nation. They were looked at as a God, even though they might have had a plethora of other gods that they also worshipped. That was a physical manifestation of God on earth, was their Caesar or their Herod. And you can even fast forward that as it's traveled through time up until today, whereas you have the Pope saying that he is God. In fact, there was a canon. Well, and we're talking about how the spirituality relates back and forth. Because there's so many things that even after school, when I went and started researching the law and looking at legal aspects of things, all of a sudden little bells started going off in my head. Things that didn't make sense when I was in church or in the Christian school. I was like, oh my gosh, this is what that was all about.
Yes. Yes.
In
Yes.
fact, I think I mentioned to you, I've always told people go back to the beginning. Always start at the beginning to figure out what's going on. As myself, I want to learn, what's the nexus between us and the state. This isn't like the Law of Nations with Emer Vattel um, back in, what was it, 1750 or whatever. Just because you're born somewhere means automatically you're subject to that land. Well, we're in a new age now. We're in a digital age. Things have changed. And so I was like, what is the nexus? And I went back and I was starting to read United States Code, starting with Title One. And I was reading through that, Title One, Two, Three, and like I told you, I was like, gosh, why does this sound familiar? And it
Mhm.
wasn't till about the third time that I was partway through reading it, all of a sudden the bell went off in my head. I was like, oh my gosh, this is the first book of Genesis. This is the creation. This is the establishment of jurisdiction, whether it's the land or the water. That this is just telling the same story in a different way. This was the United States creation rather than the Genesis creation. And
Yeah.
so,
That's how
yeah,
I was came about with the trusts because it occurred to me that the first well, actually, when I was looking up trust, the etymology of the word, one of the things that came up with was tryst. And then it led to, how one thing leads to another and you click on it and you keep going down the little rabbit hole. And of course, it eventually came to covenant. And, it occurred to me that, everything we do is basically a trust. And so the going back, like you said, to the very beginning, the first covenant, right, was between God and man, gave the earth to have dominion over the animals. And so it's it just kind of started to click for me that everything we do is in trust. I mean, okay, we're gonna show our age here, but we used to go to get gas and we give them $20 when it was $20 to put gas in your tank, and you trusted that there was going to be fuel in that pump, right, to go fill up your tank. Or you drop off your clothes at the valet, and you're going to get it back, or you put your kids at daycare and then you're going to get them back. So everything was in trust. So that's how I connected it. And so, I also had a interesting run with politics. I actually dated someone for 8 years who was very high up. I'll just leave it at that, so I stay alive. And I got to observe it from a girlfriend standpoint, and so I was watching, just watching, and I started to see the connections with the trusts. Everything was in trust, like literally every single thing that I thought was, you're just I don't even know.
Everything you touch, even the
Yeah,
road you
every
walk, you drive
account.
on, yeah,
Yes,
travel on, whatever. Yeah.
everything. They would talk in these meetings, and they would have these meetings, and I would be part of it if I didn't help host the meeting for them. And basically it was all the, whatever fund trust, and this trust. I'm like, man, every single thing. There's not one account that I've ever heard that's not a trust. And so that was kind of my little revelation of, starting to kind of understand the private side and the public side. And we always hear public sector or private sector really when we're in the regular world, but then we don't really understand what that translates to.
We don't realize how literal it is. And
Yeah.
referring to going back, the backdrop behind me, that is Pergamum, going back to what could be found from the 3rd century BC. And that was where the seat of Satan was. It was there in Pergamum, which is basically between the Middle East and Europe. It's in Turkey. And so I find that topic kind of interesting as well. Pergamum now that seat of Satan is in Berlin, Germany. Appropriate place for it, huh? And I think it was about 1930 that they started moving it there. And we know what took place within Germany in the early 30s. So
wow, interesting.
that's just kind of a visual. There's another visual I want to show you as well. Let me see if I'm going to be able to switch it over here. See what happens. Playing around with technology. And I think visuals are great for people.
The body. Yeah.
And there we go. What you're seeing there, that's the layout for the tabernacle in the desert. It was also called the tent meeting, or the meeting for prayer. And you'll see the whole layout right there. Somebody, you can find that in Google Images or whatever and find everything that's listed there. But you're going to see at the very top, that smaller square area you see at the very top, that was where the Ark of the Covenant was. That was back in the Holy of Holies. And right across that blue line there in the next box, that's where the candlesticks were. That's where the showbread was. Where that arrow is kind of pointing towards that box in the center, that was where the incense was. That was the altar of incense, which you see that in the courtroom. There's just every courtroom I've been in, I've looked for it. And you always see this ledge that runs across the front of the bench in front of the judge or judicial administrator. That was your altar of incense. And then, of course, you've got the gate in the back, which is in the courtroom. It separates out the regular people, the Gentiles, and keeps them out from the sacred space. And very often, most of the Gentiles don't want to be invited through that gate. Gee, imagine why, because right there you've got your altar of sacrifice. Nobody wants to be a part of that. But so many of these little details like that are so obvious, like in our face, that once you see them, you can't unsee them. You know what I
Right.
mean?
That's also for those of you guys that have kind of looked into the Hebrew, that's the bait. the equivalent of the letter B,
Right.
which was represented as a tent.
Yep.
So that same shape. So if you look at the Paleo Hebrew, it looks like a little, it looks the same kind of shape, and it shows like the entrance of where you would have lived inside your tent. And of course that's the house of bread. So yeah, so it's
Yeah.
all correlates.
The bait was the tent of meeting.
Hmm.
Bait is a house or a tent. If you go back to much earlier, like 1611 versions of the King James Bible, you'll notice that the first chapter, they start out normally with a decorative letter that's made really big.
Hmm.
And the idea of why they did that was to let you know what that chapter was going to be about. And in the beginning of Genesis, that letter that they make a lot larger and it's all frilly with flowers around it, whatever the case may be, was the B. That's the bait, because this is a house. So that's what's telling you that's what this chapter is going to be about. It's going to be about the house.
Which to
And
me, that was the temple. Like, it was weird. The first time I saw that, I saw a different rendition of it, Brian, and it literally looked like like a robot body, like the way it's square. And I was like, oh my
right,
gosh, like I had to really look at it because the most holy place was right, in the center of the forehead. And if
mhm,
you kind of look at it as like the body, you've got the holy place, right, as kind of the center, the belly, where our gut feeling is, where we create from. Like
yep,
that whole thing just kind of clicked for me. The body, it just looked like a body to me of the um our makeup, as far as the temples and where the holy place is between your brain. And I'm sure you've seen the pictures of the sphenoid bone, which
right,
very much look like the Ark of the Covenant. Like, it's got the wings, the bone. I originally went to school to I wanted to be a doctor, so the human anatomy of the brain absolutely blew me away, because that was another layer that I had found as a younger woman in the Bible. And that's what I kind of really sucked me into studying so much, was the anatomy of it, where I was like, oh, it's like the tomb is like the fornix and the brain. And, I started relating it to all these medical things that I had learned in school. So that kind of, all tied together and correlated. And speaking of, like, kind of using that information and going back, when I had that moment where I started seeing this stuff, and sometimes I would just put it down and put my hands on my head, and it would almost I get emotional, because, like, I'm like, God, show me what this is. What is this book? Like, it's like a code, but there's contradictions I'm finding. And sometimes it seems like they're talking about God, and sometimes they're talking about the Hasatan, which is the adversary, which of course then I realized the adversary is like your public persona, right? That's your legal that's your legal persona. Um, so it correlated, but at that moment something interesting happened, because when I was going through that, like, questioning period, just like a little kid when they realize Santa Claus, right, isn't wait a minute, how can he go down the chimney, right? You start questioning all of these things, and I started questioning who put this book together. Let me go back to this council and start researching this. So I went on a little 6-month journey, and it led me back. It was actually a lot more difficult to find than I had imagined, but I eventually found it, and I found some connections. And you know how when you're looking for something so intently, like, eventually it kind of manifests itself for you. And that's energy, right? You're gathering that energy, and you're thinking about it so much that it comes to you. And that's the beauty of the intelligent universe that we live in. Of course, I'm a huge quantum physics nerd too. So I went back and I started looking at who put this book together, and I found out some really interesting research. And I don't know if you've ever heard of or looked at it. I found out that the dynasty that paid the council to do this was the Flavian dynasty, which was Herod's bloodline. And then, of course, we're always taught in church that, Josephus corroborated all of these stories. Well, here, the one nugget that I found that was like the whoa moment for me was Josephus was actually married to Flavian's niece. So he was a paid historian who was basically told whatever to write, right? Like we know they were,
Right.
they changed the history and wrote what they wanted. And so then I'm like, well, crap, I could just throw Josephus out the window at this point because now he has zero. But again, like every, theologian or teacher that I had ever had was like, well, Josephus and Josephus and Josephus. So you're
I
indoctrinated to believe he
right. Well,
corroborates it all.
I still recommend people researching from Josephus Flavius, and yeah, that's how he got the name Flavius, is because he was adopted into that family. Josephus Flavius wasn't born Josephus Flavius. In fact, there's a lot of questions out there that he could have even maybe been Paul,
Yeah,
which
I've
I
I've
find
seen that.
fascinating.
Yeah, I've seen that. And it is interesting because and I remember reading that too, going, oh my gosh, this is like again, God, what is this book? Right. Like I called it my dark night of the soul because I literally was just like, I don't even know what I've been believing my whole life. You're right. You come to this point where, I mean, at least I did. I had to literally just kind of not start completely from scratch. You have a foundation, but I'm still the way that way to this day. I try to stay neutral and say compartmentalize everything. Like, okay, this I'm not sure about yet. This I think I know from what I've studied, but again, it could change tomorrow with new information. And I think being open like that and not thinking that I knew it all and not letting that ego go because I almost died. So like the ego for me was like, it, you realize what you're doing and what you think and the more educated that people become on a certain topic, I think sometimes we let those that egos come in. So I had to really just let go of all that and say, I know nothing. Okay,
Right.
I know nothing. Where do I need to go from here? And just ask for the wisdom every day. My dad would always say that, like, how did you figure that out? Because my dad was very instrumental in this journey that I'm on, even though now he struggles with it because, again, it's against what we all taught and know. And
All of this goes totally against the grain for what we
yeah,
were indoctrinated with. But
yeah,
that's why we were indoctrinated with it, because they had to kind of show you what they wanted you to think or what they wanted you to believe.
yes. And then all your Christian friends are like, you're falling away, including my own father. So here's my dad who raised me to be this question everything person and start looking at everything. I remember him telling me these crazy things when I was a teenager and I was just like, whoa, this is blowing my mind. But he's the one that made me like that. But then it's almost as if I kept going and he got to a point where he was uncomfortable going any further because when we were sharing things he'd be like, whoa, that's pretty deep, right? And then he got to a point and now he's in his late 70s and he's just kind of like, I'm struggling, maybe I should just go back to the beginning, maybe I should just go back to where I was. Like I think it's fear. It to me, that's just how I read it. He's afraid to cross that bridge and say everything that I learned was, this isn't it. And I had this really deep conversation actually like 2-3 weeks ago with this beautiful family who, when I moved into this area, like I didn't know anybody. I moved around a lot because my job, I traveled. I was independent, so I moved around a lot to handle clients. And this wonderful family took me in, brought me to their church. They were super sweet. And after a while, when I started learning all this, I kind of like slowly pulled away from them. And of course, she thought I was falling away. And so we had this really beautiful conversation a few weeks ago where she's now learning this. And she knows I know this stuff because I've dropped hints to her son, who I'm very, very good friends with. And now he's starting to learn it and understand this. He's now done the revocation of election. So he's telling his mom all this. And she called me and she goes, how long have you been carrying this burden? She goes, now I see why you pulled away, because this information is so controversial that you probably felt like you couldn't express this. What you were learning to us is this hardcore Christian family. I said, that's exactly it. Like I lost everybody.
Oh,
you know?
Kary, let me explain something too for those listening, is I've noticed this happen very, very often over time, more often than not. You mentioned revocation of election. And most people, when they hear the word election, the only thing they can equate it to is voting. And so just let everybody know it has nothing to do with voting. If you pop open a legal dictionary where, like I've said, they haven't changed the meaning of words. What they did is certain words, they reclassified them as terms. So they now became a tool of the Judicial Society. And so now, since it was a tool of the Judicial Society, now they could define their tool how they wanted to. So the word election really means choice. And, so many of the definitions for the terms really aren't anything brand new. If you go way, way back in etymology, even go back maybe even 100 years ago, you'll find that certain words were used much different than we do today, like the word election. Election just means choice. So a revocation of election says that you've changed your mind. You don't want to become part of the tax club anymore. That's the
Yes.
basis to it.
Yeah. And that was, I forgot I didn't wrap up that story either about my IRS case. It just said that I was successful, but I did receive back a letter from the chief tax judge for the U.S. tax court, who at the time was Michael Thornton. I received a letter back from him, and it's a little bit. I think you guys would get a little bit of a little chuckle out of it because it's kind of cute for me now. But it says in big bold black letters, underline, cases dismissed for lack of jurisdiction, and then it says under it, petitioner failed to pay the $60 court fee.
Right.
So it's just kind of funny to me because they were saying that I owed over $100,000, and then they said they
Hold on a
dismissed
second.
it because I didn't pay $60 court fee.
Hold on a second. And Adele Weiss kept telling you, don't pay it. Whatever you
Don't
do,
pay it. It's a
don't pay
contract.
it.
Yeah, it's a negotiable instrument, right? If you're sending a check and that's a contract. So don't do it. And he said, oh, that was his story. He said, the only time I've had one screw up is because someone didn't follow my directions, very specific directions. And I said, okay, what's that trap so I don't fall into it? He said, whatever you do, do not pay the court fee because that is a contract. And, I was like, okay, Roger that. Wrote in big, bold letters, do not pay the court fee. So that's just kind of the funny wrap up to that, is that's what it said in there, is that they dismissed and just, oh, we're just going to let this $100,000 plus go because, you didn't pay your $60 court fee, Kary, but have a nice day. So
Well,
I was
if
like, thank
anybody wants
you.
to access specific information regarding Weiss, you can just go online and you're going to look up Weiss and Associates. It's spelled Weiss, Weiss and Associates. And in fact, there's several posts to the original Tactical Sovereignty group that has it listed there, and there's probably a couple in the current group as well.
Yeah, he's wonderful and very patient. He understands that not everybody really comprehends. I'm sorry, I know a lot of people are sensitive to the word understand. It's just my just my indoctrination. So I do know the difference. But anyway, our comprehension, right? He understands that, and he really takes time. And he even called me on a Sunday one time because I was worried about something, and I don't know. He was very like an uncle or a grandfather to me. Like that's how he took me through. So please, if you go through him, tell him Kary sent you. I'm just very grateful for him. And I, love to, if you guys are having those problems and those issues, he's the guy. I mean, he literally, helps walk you through every step of the way, gives you very clear instructions and says, if you don't understand one of those things, do not move forward. Contact me first. It doesn't want you to get into any trouble by doing anything that you shouldn't be doing. Now I mean, looking back, like I said, it was such a stepping stone because it was the most stressful time of my life. Besides cancer, right? But at the same time, it taught me so much, and to have that piece of paper come back to say that right in front of my face, that everything I had been studying all these years was true, right? It was the real deal. Like that's, it was just a wow moment, and hopefully I can help others through whatever, that they're going through, that I went through, that, I can be a little assistance, or talk people through.
And I, like we were saying earlier, and I think one of the things that will help people start realizing what's going on and seeing things for what they are is like we were talking about, that so much of this really is spiritual. And that's why I said, it's great if somebody has good biblical knowledge, because more and more light bulbs will come on for you to see how all of this has been done. And let me
Yes.
just throw the meeting of prayer, or the tabernacle photo back up there, and just kind of think about what goes on when somebody gets, quote unquote, invited to court, because you're being summoned like a spirit. Only spirits are summoned. That happens, like in witchcraft or in a ceremony. You get summoned like a spirit to come into the court, where the black robed priest or magi or magistrate is at. They're there in the county temple. Think of that courthouse. It's the county temple. They're in every county.
Yep.
And in there, you're going to see the altar of sacrifice. And right there in front of the altar, you see the altar of incense in front of the judge.
Yeah, because you're
And there's
sacrificing your
yourself.
true nature for the legal fiction.
And at the same time, you're going to see there's going to be, the choir box, or actually, in this case, a jury box. And you're going to be required to pray or plea for relief. Pray and plea are the same exact words. And you're ordered to pay bail, either BAAL or BAIL. You're paying bail. And you're also paid to basically pay off your crime or pay off your sin. That's what indulgences were. You were paying to help people, get released from purgatory sooner, or have relief from that. And so there you're looking for relief, from jail or hell, which, like we said earlier, was under the bench of the exchequer or
Yeah.
the priest. And you're paying that off with mammon, or money that you've sacrificed for. You've sacrificed for it as a debtor or sinner. And those two words are synonymous in scripture with each other. And that's exactly what they did. If you go into UCC, or Uniform Commercial Code, who are they always referring to? They're talking about the debtor all the time. Well, think of it as sinner in their eyes. In this instance, it's the same exact roles. Everything's just been mirrored. It's been flip-flopped. Satan said he wouldn't become greater than God. He said he would become like God, because he knows he can't be greater, but he can be like him. He can mirror him. And that's what the whole system has done. It's just simply mirrored the image.
And I'm glad you brought that up about the court, being that, because at my realization point of that, I realized it was like, I was like, wow, this is like the synagogue of Satan. Like, you're walking in, right? Like, you start putting two and two together. And then I was like, okay, basically from my Hebrew studies, right?
Mhm.
Hashatan is the adversary. So then it clicked for me that like, again, when we move over to this, I love what you say. I steal this, and I always give you credit. The legal imitates the spiritual, right? That's what it is. Because then that, at that moment, was my realization, that the adversary was that legal person. That's
Well,
my adversary in that room. That's your,
yeah,
the synagogue of it. Like, that's the sacrificial.
that
uh
that's your vicar, a vicar of
yes,
Christ.
vicar of Christ, right?
Vicar just kind of means it's so loaded with different things, but it can mean the opposite, or like polar opposite, or the representation of. And that's actually, since you mentioned it, a good time to say, we've talked about tactical sovereignty. I've got a sister group to tactical sovereignty. It's called Origins of Eternity on Facebook. And in that group, I started throwing a lot of this type of information in there, because I knew most people weren't ready for it yet. You know what I mean?
Yeah, at
So
the time you
things,
started that, it was
yeah.
still, it was kind of at that point like that where it was still controversial to even say that, because then all the Christians who are a
Oh yeah.
part of this movement, a lot of them realizing, they're like, "Oh, wait a minute," you know.
Uh, it's like, was it J. Robin Bondservant, whatever name he's going by? He put out a YouTube saying, "Beware of Brian Parker, the Antichrist." You
Yeah.
know, because a lot of this stuff was so opposite to what everybody's learned that it's like, oh, well, if y- you're comparing it maybe to what people's religion is, which I don't agree with any religion. Religion is just a man-made construct. People really should seek to be more spiritual. But
Exactly.
when you start pointing these things out, they think you're dishing on their religion, or you're dishing on their pope or their priest or their pastor. No, it's not the case at all. It, what I'm showing, and what blows my mind is, how come the pastors? Well, I know why, but how come the pastors or the priest or whatever? Why aren't they showing these things?
That's the
Because
same
they've
thing my mom's asked me.
yeah, they've
Exactly.
obviously got to. Any of them that do any study or research at all have to know these things. Any of them that do any research or anything at all, even regarding Paul, it stands out like a sore thumb once you start looking into it. Just do an independent search into it. All these things just start blasting in front of you. It's like, oh my God, didn't you listen to Paul when he said, if somebody comes forward preaching something other than the message of Christ Jesus, you should turn your back on him? He's telling you, don't listen to me.
Right. Yeah. And then you have the realization that like every single thing that you've learned is the opposite of pretty much of what it is. Then you go, okay, again, I know nothing. And I,
But
I always say that I know
you
nothing. I'm
can
trying to learn.
you can use that to your benefit, though. Okay, for instance, with the situation with Josephus, um, when you realize that Josephus might not be just who you think he is, he could be Paul. There's actually three or four different personalities from that era that I've heard attributed to being Josephus. But once you have that knowledge, that doesn't mean, oh, now you're just going to close the book and turn your back on him and walk the other way. No, absolutely not.
Right. Right.
Because now you've got some knowledge that the average individual may not have when they read Josephus. So that means now you can read him through a different lens, through a different set of eyes, and a lot of things will start making sense to you.
Yeah. That's the key to this whole thing, I think, is really again putting down that ego and saying, I don't, I and going into fresh eyes, and to me that was also like kind of the spiritual born again portion, and not only again moving that over to the legal side, right? That's what we're doing with our legal person. We're kind of being born again, and in saying, hey, we're the
Absolutely.
spiritual. And that's the beauty of it.
Yeah.
It's like it's actually so beautiful when you think about it, and it's an adventure. It's an
You hit it.
adventure at this
Yep.
point.
You hit it on the head right there. And so much information and so many things I've learned from either current attorneys or retired attorneys, retired judges, from Jesuits, and these are people in the truth community, quote unquote, they'd be like, oh, you can't listen to them. They lie to you. Da, da. You know what I mean? It's like, no, it's different when you're having private conversations. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's also different when they are amongst each other talking, because they're not going to lie in front of each other, because they're all going to know that each other's lying. They're going to be speaking the truth. So, yeah. And what better place to gain good inside information from? Are you supposed to listen to some just Joe Blow or Anna Von Reitz who's just rambling, making up stuff off the top of her head without providing any background or research or source information on it? No, absolutely not.
Right. Right. Oh, I was going to say something too about that point you made, but I, 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 I think it's also, we come into this knowledge, and I look back at how many times, okay, when I was, in the church, did I hear something that was on the spiritual side that I completely rejected? Because again, at that point, I was like, nope, because that goes against what I believe, and that goes against,
Yeah.
and there's certain things now that I kind of chuckle back and I go, there, that was my ego, right? Like saying, oh, you think you know it all. And now, like I say, I just really try to have that. I mean, it sounds silly because I know we all know a lot, but I really try to stay in the frame of mind because again, with I'm still learning. I'm still learning because with every day that passes, I mean, literally I almost learned something new, if not every day, about this every week. I mean, I just learned some really cool stuff from a group on Telegram about the post office this week that just blew my mind, that I had never heard before. So there's just so much that kind of still comes through, and I've been looking at this stuff for probably close to, I would say, I mean, I probably found it like a decade ago, but at the beginning, I really didn't know where to look for it. That was finding a needle in a haystack back then because your people like, Boris and everything were so underground that you
Yeah.
really had to go digging to find them. And Boris, I loved his stuff. Like stuff he was saying just was like so blown away. But again, it was over my head. You were over my head at the time, David Merrill. But again, I kept listening anyway.
I, li-
I'd call in. Go ahead.
I like
Sorry.
I like I like Boris. Boris is a good guy. In fact, you had mentioned something earlier about people wanting to get together or whatever, and I really think we should have something like that. Do something like that. Maybe somewhere centrally located, to Florida or whatever, and get Boris to come.
Yeah.
I love hanging out with him. I've always enjoyed talking with him, and very down to earth. So
Yeah, he blew my mind when I got in and the stuff he was saying about how he was breaking down symbols. I mean, nobody was talking about the stuff he was talking about.
right,
And like I remember listening in on one thing how he was explaining the pentagram, which right, we all as Christians are like, "Oh, it's evil, stay away." He was explaining like when the star point is up and the star point is down. He was explaining an energy flow. It's actually a diagram. That's where we get the word open from, O pentagram.
right.
And he was showing the diagram of the energy flow and how it translates to currency. And I was like, this dude is like on another level. Like I had never heard anything he was saying. At the same time, I'm not going to lie, as a female, he scared the heck out of me. I don't know why. I think it's just sometimes the guys, the way they respond to people, as an empath, I'm like, I'm not going to ask any questions because I'm going to get
Boris,
totally annihilated.
you know,
I'm ignorant.
yeah, listen to him. People might think a little bit of narcissism or something like that. No, he's just very sure what he's talking about. But if you meet him, he's a big teddy bear.
I'm sure. And like I said, I know you
Yeah,
guys deal with so much. And I hate to say, but like everybody's coming in and they're all on different paths. And that's kind of what I had to attribute it to with my parents and, people that I, just, thought I was wearing the tinfoil hat, like you're crazy. And, but I just thought, you know what? I was once there where I rejected information too, right? Like no matter
yeah,
what it was, I rejected it because it was against my faith, what I believed. And so now I'm like, you know what? It's not my job to wake the world up because we are all on our own little spiritual journeys here. And we find people along our path that can help us out. And some of them are stumbling blocks on purpose because we'll learn from them. So if we can encounter, teachers / gurus of this, whatever you want to call them, some of them are stepping stones and some of them are stumbling blocks. And
right.
so I just kind of try to go, okay, this one has been consistent and then I piece together and I love that you guys actually have always challenged us to, do your own research on it and don't copy what I'm doing, do your own. And it is helpful for a newbie, right, to see that because we've never seen, I mean, you and Kurt Kallenbach's, your declarations, I was like, whoa, like I got a lot of work to do. I have a lot of studying to do, but they were so like eloquent, well written, exactly what we all knew we wanted to say, but didn't know how to say it or if we even could say it. And those tools that you guys all gave us, especially in that group, and I know Kurt was in there too, and I took all his classes. I couldn't get enough. I was like, I'm like a sponge. Like whatever it is, I just want to know. I, kind of live and breathe this stuff in my own free time, which is limited, but this is what I I don't want to, it's not even, I mean, it's not even an enjoyment. I guess I take enjoyment out of the adventure of it because now, I said this on Micah's show. I kind of look at it like I'm just some kind of spiritual. I chose, maybe if we live for eternity, if we know we're eternal beings, then I probably did choose to come here. Like, why not? If you're eternal, who says you can't?
Well, and
So,
this absolutely is, and whether you're looking at law and how things really came about, or if you're looking at scripture, scripture says to weigh and examine all things. Correct? Well,
right.
guess what? That also means scripture. You need to weigh and examine that because to me, I found it really fascinating. I mean, to me, all the time, there are more and more things popping out of it because it's a treasure book.
It
And
is. It
and guess
is.
what? It is providing you some deception as well. But you're supposed to be weighing these things and paying attention
Right.
because you know what? The system, whatever you want to think of the scripture, it doesn't matter because the system does believe in it. The system does believe in scripture. The only difference is there's a different God that's mentioned in large portions of the scripture that the system follows. And it's not the one that you think you're following.
Right. Right. And that's the journey, the path is figuring out what that is and who you are in it and following that gut that we were created with for a reason and saying, okay,
Well,
this.
well, speaking of Paul, I guess we've gone over an hour, so why not circumcise this call? It,
Certainly.
and we're going to be getting together here shortly with Micah Dank, so people can look forward to that. Kelly has also been on Micah Dank's. What was it, like a couple weeks ago? You're on an episode with him. I've been on there
I
as
think about
well.
3 weeks ago. Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, you can just look up Kary Adams, KaryAdams. You're not like in the posterity of one of the founders, are you? With the last name Adams.
No, it's that was my married into name. So
Okay.
nope, not in the posterity. I wish I
Okay.
was. My bank account might be a little more credited. but,
uh,
um, but yeah, it's we're nope, just a normal Joe Schmo and kind of bringing the female energy into it and saying, hey, I was scared, I did it, you can do it too, and stay on the path because it's an adventure. It really is.
absolutely, absolutely. Well, like I tell people every week, uh, if you want to know where you're supposed to start learning or what you should be looking at, what you have to start with is learning who you really are, where you're really from, and where you're really at. Because you've been deceived on all three levels of that, as Kary has attested to this evening. Thank you for being here tonight.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, guys. Talk to y'all later.
Good night.
Good night. Bye.